The 1950s, your 4th of July picnic, kids running around, moms in sundresses, dads grilling burgers, not a single soul tipping the scales. Take a look at those old snapshots. America at its healthiest, in its prime. Skinny guys in fedoras, women with tiny waists, kids who look like they could outrun a cheetah. Fatties? Not a one. A double chin? Only if you're looking in a Chinese phone book. Fast forward to the late 90s, when a girl ballooning up to a
deuce and a half. Not bad.
Oh, my, a deuce and a half, huh?
was considered morbidly obese. How quaint. Now let's fast forward to today, where you can waddle through a Walmart and it's a sea of stretch pants and motorized scooters. What the heck happened? How did we go from lean and mean to a nation that needs to employ a crane to lift lardos off the couch? Not to mention destroying my mail order bride business that I personally owned, where I was sending fatties to Japan.
You've heard of mail order brides, haven't you? Well, they go that way too.
Who value obese women.
Don't forget, it's a sumo culture. They pay by the pound there, sort of like tuna.
That is, until the supply became overwhelming. Let's talk stats for a second. Back in the 50s, obesity was sub 5%. And we were one of the few nations where that was even a possibility. I mean, even in the 1990s, in most countries around the world, people might look up from their meager portion of rice, seeing an obese person stride by, and they would toss their bowl on the ground, race after them and say, "Damn, how you do that? I'm hanging out with you." Today, the obesity rate is pushing 40%. And that's not counting the just chubby crowd. Kids, I'm talking little kids, are clocking in at 20% on the obesity scale. Living abroad, I hadn't been home to the US in about 4 years, and I landed in Las Vegas and I was horrified. In the airport, I saw like one very attractive, thin black girl in tight clothes amongst the rolls of jelly. And I immediately thought, if she's a stripper, and this being Las Vegas, that's definitely a possibility, she's making the big bucks keeping fit. This isn't some gradual drift. It's an avalanche into the valley of the soft underbelly. So, how did we get here? Is it just that we're lazy, or is there something bigger at play? Spoiler alert, it's both. And the path we are going down won't lead anywhere pretty. Start with the obvious, food. In those old photos, people ate real stuff, meat, potatoes, veggies directly from their garden. Sugar was a treat, not a food group. Now we are drowning in high fructose corn syrup, supersized sodas, and snacks that come in bags big enough to feed a platoon. Look at the cereal aisle. Bright colors, cartoon mascots, and enough sugar to give a horse diabetes. Back then, breakfast was eggs and bacon. Today, it's a bowl of candy with milk on top. And portion sizes? Restaurants like the Cheesecake Factory serve enough food per plate to last a British orphanage a year.
Please, sir. I want some more.
Evolutionarily, we are used to lack. And if you were lucky enough to be invited to a feast, you would wolf down as much as quickly as you possibly could. So to be completely fair, it makes sense that at the outset of this new era of caloric bounty, the human body would react to plenitude by ballooning up, as our evolution would instruct. But it's not just what we eat, it's how we live as well. Those old photos, people moved. Dads walked to work or mowed the lawn with a push mower. Moms scrubbed floors and chased toddlers. Kids played outside until the street lights flickered on. Now, we're glued to our screens, our TVs, our phones, video games. The average American sits 10 hours a day, and that's before you count the Netflix binges. Cars are everywhere, and walking is for suckers. The efficiency of machines have taken over what was once necessary physical movement, and new digital outlets of play compete for our time and energy. As being sedentary wins, our waistlines, they expand. And human beings naturally love the easy way out, the path of least resistance. Look at those old photos again. Nobody's popping diet pills or guzzling skinny teas. They didn't need to. Life kept them lean. Today, we have the option to medicate rather than move. We snack rather than cook. We play football on the PlayStation instead of on the grass field. And here's where it gets dark. Post-World War II, new technologies shot productivity through the roof, giving us an abundance of crops, big yields in agriculture, and thus cheap food. As fewer people were needed to cultivate crops, it led to corporate centralization of production and gave us big food. Who immediately began to lobby the government for subsidies? Corn became king. Corn syrup began to pour into everything. Bread, ketchup, even frickin' yogurt. Then Wall Street figured out you can profit off addiction. Sugar hits the brain like cocaine, and now they've got us hooked. Meanwhile, the feds push dietary guidelines that tell us to load up on carbs and ditch the fat. Do you remember the food pyramid? It was a recipe for rolls around the middle. They sold us a lie and we ate it up literally. I used to believe it was the most important thing to eat a huge bowl of grape nights every single morning. I was a chump. And my dad, who preferred bacon and eggs, I have to admit today, was completely correct. But nevertheless, I, like millions of us, was lied to for their profit. But those folks in the old photos, they weren't disciplined saints. They just didn't have 24/7 access to Doritos and DoorDash. Today, we do, and too many of us say yes every single time. The solution, however, isn't rocket science. Eat less, move more, yet we act like it's a mystery. And thus, diet books continue to be on the New York Times bestseller list. But all those harpies yelling that obesity is due to genetics, and how dare we mock those born with a worse hand?
How dare you!
That is blatant propaganda introduced by the food industry that profits from serving us calorically dense, tasty, unhealthy food that is cheap for them to make. But The View and other paid for and bought media outlets prattle on about it and shame you for judging the morbidly obese. And then the conveyor belt of fatties being produced by Kellogg's, Mondelez, and Kraft will be joyfully taken by the medical industry as the caring profiteers lobby for mandatory government subsidies for Ozempic, whose side effects will almost certainly come to light at a later date.
Dad, what if I told you you could lose weight without dieting or lifting a finger?
I'd say you're a lying scumbag. Why, sweetie?
As they dip their corrupt hands into the ever-expanding pool of taxed and printed reserve currency of the world, the US dollar, actively redistributing it amongst the big pharma companies in a form of corporate welfare. And that is why we are incredibly fortunate to have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the HHS. He brings an unshakable resolve to serve the American people with a clear mission to dismantle the pervasive corruption of big pharma within our federal government. RFK is not just a critic of the system, he's a force for change, of good, determined to encourage a healthier nation. His appointment is a bold step towards prioritizing the well-being of Americans over corporate profits. It's why they fought against his nomination so vociferously, because he has integrity and he will not bend to their influence. And a pox on those senators who last time cast votes in assent for an obese, unhealthy-looking man who insisted that he was a woman, unhealthy inside and out, who had the temerity to instruct us on maintaining physical and mental fitness. And they voted against RFK's vision for a stronger and healthier America. I wonder who owns their vote. I mean, America is probably the least healthy country on the planet because of our excess, but the blue team insists that we vote for maintaining the status quo. Why? Because they're the beneficiaries. But beyond curbing big pharma's strangleholds, what can RFK actually achieve as HHS Secretary? Well, he has the platform and the authority to reshape our national approach to health. For one, he could push for transparency in the food and drug industries, exposing how processed foods are engineered through scientific A/B testing to addict us for their profit. He might champion policies that incentivize healthier eating, like tax breaks for organic farming or for companies producing nutrient-dense, rich, unprocessed food. Imagine public health campaigns that don't just nag us to eat better, but actually educate us on how our bodies thrive when fueled by real nutrition rather than chemical-laden junk. But one thing is for certain, I recognize that you cannot mandate people to toss away their Kraft macaroni and cheese. I mean, who am I to tell you what you must do with your body? I mean, I'm not Pfizer under the Biden administration. You are entitled to eat whatever it is that you want, whether it's a fried egg, soda, or Oreo cookies. And it's not RFK's or any government's job to play food police. Personal responsibility matters. However, it's not the government's role to bail you out with my tax dollars, with your tax dollars, if people's choices don't work out, pun intended, for them. Health starts with accountability. RFK could also shift the cultural conversation. He's got the tenacity to call out the obesity epidemic without tiptoeing around feelings, something that I believe as a nation we desperately need. I'd even argue for bringing back a bit of fat shaming, not out of cruelty, but because people respond to incentives. Public scorn can be a powerful nudge, motivating folks to rethink their habits. Study show societal pressure has historically influenced behavior from smoking cessation to fitness trends. RFK could lead by example, promoting a no-nonsense ethos, take charge of your health or face the consequences. He could partner with local governments also to fund community fitness initiatives like outdoor free gyms or walking trails, making exercise accessible without forcing it down anyone's throat. Also, an overhaul of the school lunch program is long overdue, replacing sugary processed slop with meals that actually nourish growing kids, as well as removing anything but one-word foods like lettuce, egg, apple, steak from government food stamp programs. You know, a former Coca-Cola consultant by the name of Callie Means told the world that the corporation paid the NAACP and other civil rights groups millions of dollars to label opponents of soda inclusion in the food stamp program as racist. Wherever a giant honeypot of money and the decisions on how it can be sent are centralized, the laws of physics dictate that there will be coercion and corruption. But the good news, my friends, it's not hopeless. Humanity is always changing. We're adapting. Some less fortunate souls don't do so as rapidly as others, but you still have time. Anyone can change their trajectory. Look at all those photos one more time. That's us, our grandparents, our roots. We've got it in us to be lean again, to be healthy, to ditch the excuses and the junk. You can start small, skip the soda, take a walk, cook a family meal with fresh ingredients. No pill is going to save us. No government's going to sweat for us. It's on you. Channel that 1950s grit, and maybe one day our photos won't need a wide-angle lens. It's within each of us, each decision we make, each trip to the grocery store, or peek inside the fridge. All the influencers in the world can be pointing towards the egg and the apple and away from the donut, but ultimately, like everything in life, it's up to the individual to decide in which direction they move. And that, my friends, is the good news. The decision for ultimate health lies solely within you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an appointment at the Gime.
Game? What's a game?
Excuse me, I meant the gym.
Oh, a game.
I'll see you there, I certainly hope.